Today, let's talk about redundancy. And what do we need? And why do we have it? Is it for our benefit or for our team's benefit? It's a bit of a different way of looking at redundancy. So let's jump right in. In technical diving, this video is mostly with technical diving in mind, although some of the aspects definitely apply also to recreational diving, meaning single tank diving. So when we look at it from a team diving point of view, we carry redundancy, in our opinion, for the team's benefit. So the team is less affected by any potential problem you might have. And I had a little discussion or like a talk, an explanation about this subject with another diver not so long ago, and it kind of made him look differently at what he brings on a dive and for whose benefit it is. So again, let's jump right in. Let's first take a look at the most obvious one, or maybe what everyone assumes is the most obvious one, is gas or tanks on your back and the regulators on your back. As soon as you start going into technical diving, we have double tanks. 2 tanks, 2 valves, and 2 separate first stages connected to 2 independent second stages. And the tanks are isolatable in the middle. So we can save also if there's a problem with the tank and the tank O-rings itself. So that's all fun and good. But if we take a look back at normal recreational diving, we save gas, right? I mean, in the UTD way, we calculate the thing that's called rock bottom. And that means you would bring enough gas to bring 2 divers up to the surface or up to the next available gas source. And that's an amount in liters. And then just divide that by the tank size you have and you get a pressure. So that's nothing different in technical diving. So if we always plan to have enough gas in our cylinder or cylinders to take 2 divers to the next available gas source or the surface, then why do we need double tanks? Something happens with that one tank or one regulator, I can share air and exit safely. That's what we've planned for. So that begs to differ. Why then do we need 2 tanks? Because then you can solve your own problem, but you still dive with a team. Because you want to hinder the team the least amount. Imagine you're on a technical dive, halfway into the dive, and you've got a failure you can't fix. In UTD we train for 2 failures, 2 types of failures: fixable failures, which you can fix underwater and continue after you've decided it's safe to do so, or non-fixable failures, which determine the end of the dive basically. So let's say you're underwater halfway through the dive with a good amount of decompression ahead of you, and you have a non-fixable failure. Your first stage breaks the high pressure seal, for example, a high pressure seat, and you cannot use that first stage. You shut that valve off that feeds gas to that particular first stage, and now you have the other first stage and the other second stage to exit your dive on. You still have the total amount of gas available because you have twin sets that's connected via a manifold, so that's no problem there, but you only have 1 regulator. In that scenario, if you didn't have 2 regulators, you would have to use an air sharing scenario, which is more cumbersome than just finishing on your own. So is it for your benefit or your team's benefit? The outcome for you would be the same. You can share gas, exit the dive, or revert to your other system and exit the dive. But your team is much less hampered by your failure. Now when we think of the volume of gas we need when there is an air sharing scenario, are you carrying backup gas for you or for your team? The extra gas you calculate to bring that other diver up is for the other guy. Yet a lot of technical divers punch in the numbers on their software, and the software spits out a number of their estimated consumption, and that's based on the number they've pushed in on an estimated consumption rate. And then they've read about the rules of thirds, and they just go that number times 1.5, and then they have the total amount of gas they would probably need for that dive. That makes no sense, because that's calculating on your consumption, not regarding the other one's consumption, not regarding that your consumption rate rises in a stressful situation. So there's a lot of gaps there, but that's a whole different video in itself, coming very soon on this channel, so stay tuned for that. So the gas you bring is for your other buddy. And here when it relates back to recreational diving, because you see a lot of divers diving with different tank sizes. The amount of liters you need as a team to bring 2 divers up to the surface stays the same, regardless of the tank size. The bars, so the volume related to the pressure, is very much a different story. So what you usually see is a very small diver, usually women that don't breathe underwater, seems to be, with a tiny tank or a tiny twin set. And then a big guy with a big tank, because he has a bigger gas usage. But what they don't realize is she is carrying his backup gas. So take that into account, that you have to not come up with a certain amount of bar to determine your turn pressure, or when you leave the bottom, or whatever you do, you have to take your liters and then divide it. So if it's, let's say, 1200 liters and one diver is diving on a 12-liter tank, that's 100 bar. A 15-liter tank, that's 80 bar. So there's different sizes. Let's talk about the next point on the list, what we bring redundancy for, or should we bring redundancy for. Instruments. What kind of instruments do we need redundancy for, and why? So when we look at basic instruments, a bottom timer or computer, a compass, or an SPG. I've made another video on how to use those items properly, so I'd suggest you look at that video also. It's an informative video that also opens your mind maybe to a different way of looking at things. But in our way, in a DIR way of teaching, we say one computer bottom timer is enough per diver. But in technical diving and decompression diving, you're very much dependent on your computer. Yes, but you're also dependent on your computer by that rationale as a recreational diver. And why are you dependent on it? Yes, because you have to know when to stop. Yeah, okay. If your equipment fails, you abort the dive. So having a backup computer would still mean you'd abort the dive, but then just using your backup computer. Right? I mean, you don't continue on your backup. I mean, maybe you do, but I would consider changing that rationale. So if my computer or bottom timer fails, battery goes out or whatever, I can turn to my team and I say, hey, my bottom timer or my computer is broken, we need to exit the dive. We stay together as a team. Up until then, we were in our limits. We know that. The deco captain takes over, as they normally would do anyway, and you exit the dive. He determines when to stop. You can even look at their instruments if you like. You're staying together, so there's no real need to bring super expensive backup computers or backup bottom timers. You can do for conveniency, but it's not necessary. And a lot of divers, they begin to think as solo divers when they start going down the technical diver path. Whereas we say the team is our backup brain, our backup gas, and our backup equipment. So, like I said before, we carry independent first stages to less hinder the team of our failures or our problems underwater. When it comes to a computer, you hear it a lot that people have double dive computers, and these things are not cheap. Especially when you get the high-end trimix with all the mumbo jumbo inside. So, wow, spending twice that is a big chunk of money for a lot of people. Because if you have that, why not have 2 compasses? It's just as important in a way to get back to the shot line. Yeah, you can follow your team. Yeah, then why can you not follow the team vertically if you can follow them horizontally? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, but and then why don't you have 2 SPGs? One on the left and one on the right. Or even 2 on one stage. I mean, most first stages have 2 high pressure ports, one on each side. That's for configuration purposes, but some of them are configured like this, so you could put 2 on. If one goes down, you can look at the other. You still don't do that. Why is that? And that's also referring to the other video about how to read your instruments, because in my opinion, or my point of view, is that an SPG is already a piece of backup equipment. If you dive with a computer, it should be a piece of backup equipment to a profile you already know or have adjusted. I mean, we teach ratio deco, which is basically a strategy. It's not a new algorithm. It's usually very, very close to whatever the computer tells you to do. But the big difference is you know what it's supposed to say. And you can be proactive in your actions underwater. The computer is a very dumb piece of machinery. It's just an Excel spreadsheet pumped in a nice LCD screen, and it's only reactive. It can only give you information about what you have done or what you are at this exact moment in time. So stay longer. Some computers you could add that. I mean, I dive with a Shearwater on my rebreather, and that has a computer inside. I can take it or leave it, and you can see inside the menu you can push numbers to add 5 minutes to your bottom time, what that will do for your ascent time, or subtract 5 minutes, or add some depth, or all that sort of stuff. Point of the fact is, with ratio deco, you know that stuff. So I don't look at my computer to tell me what to do. I know what to do, and then I just look at the computer for the depth and the time I need to stay at that depth. And most of the time the computer agrees with me. So does that mean that ratio deco is superfluous? I mean, if the computer and you agree most of the time, do you really need it? I say yes, because what if the computer does something you don't agree with? You fucked up a setting, and I can come with tons of examples on this. My personal experience as well. You fucked up something in the computer and it shows you something different. Then what? I mean, you have the knowledge to do something about it. Your computer just records and tells you what you are based on the parameters it has been fed. So a computer, I don't think you need a backup. Some people carry a backup because it's easy to take with, especially in rebreather diving. You take a loose handset with you and log your dives, and that's also perfectly fine. If you want to spend the money for that, fine, perfect. But from a safety point of view, a portion of the dive, you won't kill yourself. You will kill yourself if you don't have a backup. No, you will get out just as safely. Your team will guide you out. Same with an SPG, same with the compass. You don't need backup things of those. Again, there's no right or wrong way, it's just a choice. I mean, if you want to spend $1,000 on one Trimix computer and then $1,000 again on another Trimix computer, I mean, it looks very cool, but it's unnecessary. If we stay within rebreathers, we have 2 monitoring devices of the loop PPO2. You can argue that 2 is useless. I think that's where convenience comes in. You can calculate your PPO2 at any depth using standardized gases. We dive standardized gases to the depths they are meant to be, because that keeps our loop calculations a lot easier. It also keeps our PPO2 a lot easier to manage. That's a talk for a different video, I think. So we can do the math ourselves, and we can actually do a cell validation with a very simple calculation. So why do we have, for example, a heads-up display and a handset? Why not just one or the other? Well, here we believe that the extra information you get from that is beneficial, because you can do the maths, but it makes the rest of the dive, the exit of the dive, very, very labor intensive. If you have to do that constantly, it's not a problem to do it once to do a verification, but if you do it constantly, it gets a bit tedious. Plus, your buddy cannot tell you what your loop is. We rely on our buddies as well. So 2 of those makes good sense. We don't have double compasses like we discussed before, because the team stays together. Last item. There's more items to carry backup as well, of course, knives, cutting devices, but they are a little bit too too detailed. I mean, we'll cover that in courses and stuff like that. It makes sense to have 2 cutting devices. But one that's sometimes a bit overlooked is a backup mask. It's very rare to lose your mask. It's very rare the mask strap breaks, but it can happen. I mean, these frameless masks, sometimes the skirt loosens up from the glass and you get leaky mask, or it just happens sometimes. So if you have a backup mask, here's a little tip of the day. Put some toothpaste on the glass, a good thick layer, and let it sit. Let it sit to dry out completely, so it's hard. You can almost scratch it off with your nail. Then you put a little tiny layer. You need to do 2 layers. A little layer of toothpaste again on that, and let it sit again till it's dry and hard, and then you stow it in your pocket. Because, be honest, who of you in the pre-dive check takes out their backup mask, spits in it, defogs it, sticks it back? No one. I don't either. I mean, no one does that. And it's a pain in the ass to have to revert to your backup mask, and it's fogging up all the time. If you put that little layer of toothpaste in there, 2 layers, then when you take your backup mask out, all you do is just wipe with your fingers that toothpaste away, and it goes away fairly easily. You put your mask on, smells nice, and it doesn't fog in the remainder of that dive. And you have to only reapply that every, 10-15 dives or something like that, depending on how rough you are with the stuffs in your pocket and what kind of water you dive. But usually it stays there for about 10 dives. So that's a little handy tip of the day. So to recap, we have backup, yes, for ourselves, but primarily for our team's benefit, so our failures don't impact the team as much. The gas we bring is for our team, so taking your consumption rate times the minutes times the depth times 1.5 is not enough. You have to take into account your buddy's elevated consumption rate. And if you dive different tank sizes, you need to take into account that there's different sets of pressures to exit the dive on. Smaller tank, bigger the pressure. Anyway, short little video on redundancy and a different way of looking at it, as you might have done before. So stay tuned. There's soon to be coming a very nice video on the rule of thirds, an explanation that makes it a little bit easier to understand. It is not just as simple as taking the gas you need on the bottom times 1.5 and all is good. It's a bit more intricate than that. But stay tuned, and we'll see you out there.